All right, let's go ahead and get started and officially kick off the September 2023 OSHA webinar. I guess that's most likely the 9th in the series. I can't recall. For those of you that have been with us for the last few years, you remember we added quite a few unplanned webinars during COVID as events warranted, and we still do that from time to time, but I believe this is the 9th in our series this year. This is a new program, at least certainly one that we haven't done in quite a while. We work pretty hard every year in the fall and early winter planning the webinars for the next year, and we felt that this was a good time to really focus on power industrial trucks or PITs or PIVs or however you prefer to call it. It seems like the majority of our clients across all manner of industries, whether it's manufacturing, logistics, warehousing, have forklifts. Some more than others, some more integral to their operations than others. It's a frequently cited standard, as I'm sure most, if not all of you know. And we thought it would be helpful to bring to bear a lot of the experience, the things that we've seen and dealt with across different inspections, the types of citations we typically see, recommendations that we have. So hope that this will be a helpful discussion for anyone who uses forklifts, and those of you that have joined, I assume that's a big reason. When we originally planned the program, it was really just going to focus on power industrial trucks, but then OSHA went ahead and announced and released its national emphasis program on warehousing operations, and so we tweak the program a little bit to cover both. So the first section of the webinar today is going to focus just on powered industrial trucks, and then and Ashley will be your guide through that exciting world, and then I will cover towards the end the national emphasis program on warehousing operations, and take a dive into some of the standards that we most commonly see come up in those types of inspections. So just quickly to run through introductions, since we know that you're not here to hear us talk about ourselves, but rather the content. So I'm Aaron Gelb. I'm one of the firm's managing partners. I sit in Chicago, where I lead our Midwest OSHA practice. Although that said, I handle OSHA matters throughout the country, state plan states, Fed OSHA states, really from coast to coast, north to south. Been involved in lots of inspections recently where forklifts have come up. It seems like OSHA is always trying to expand here in the Midwest in Region 5 because there are local emphasis programs for the deal with forklifts. So it comes up quite a lot. So looking forward to talking to you all about this. I will turn it over to Ashley to introduce herself and then take you through the forklift or PIT portion of our program.
Thanks, Aaron. Hello, everyone. As Aaron said, I am Ashley Mitchell, and I am an associate in our Chicago office. Like Aaron, I do handle OSHA matters throughout the country, and more specifically as it relates to our topic today, I have participated in OSHA inspections where the compliance officer was on site for either a reportable injury or, an employee complaint. The compliance officer saw a forklift whiz by and instantly expanded that inspection due to the LEPs that Aaron referenced here in the region. And so I am really looking forward to talking with you guys about powered industrial trucks, and I am going to do so now without further delay. So when we think of some of the key issues that OSHA focuses on a granular level, PIT operations are one of the topics that OSHA does routinely emphasize in inspections, especially in warehouses and other workplaces where powered industrial trucks are integral to the employer's operations. And so there are several key components to a successful PIT program. But the big ones are employee training, identification and repair of defects or safety issues, any modifications or attachments that are made to any pits that your employees are using, data plates and load capacity, and then of course, safety operations. And all of these things are going to be increasingly important, as Aaron will mention during his segment. But just to give you a little flavor, for just a little over 4% of all citations issued in 2022 were for alleged violations of 1910-178, which is the PIT standard. And a little over 3.5% of OSHA's total assessed penalties were related to alleged violations of 1910-178, that OSHA PIT standard. And so I am wondering if anyone on our call knows what the most commonly cited PIT violations are for. Don't worry, we're not going to ask for crowd participation, but just kind of, think to yourself what some of those most commonly cited violations are for, because on the next slide, I am going to tell you that if you guessed training, then you are correct. So 1,146 of those 1,915 citations issued last year were related to training. And so we're going to spend some time now just talking about the training portion of a PIT program. And so the training program should consist of three things. Number one, classroom training. Number two, hands-on practical demonstration. And number three, a trainer evaluation to ensure that the operator is competent and certified to operate PITs in your specific workplace. Now, as far as the content is concerned, the regulations do spell out a number of truck-related topics and workplace-related topics, and those are all listed in subsection L3 of the standard. But one thing that is critically important to keep in mind is that operators must be trained on the different types of PITs that they may be operating in the workplace. And that is to say, if your facility has various different size pits or pallet jacks, it's imperative to make sure that operators are being trained on the difference between the pit, whether it's a stand-up or sit down or a pallet jack. They need to really be aware of the differences between those pits and their respective safe operations and limitations. Now, as it relates to truck-related topics, it's important to understand that employees understand just the general operating instructions, any warnings, any precautions for the types of trucks that the operator will be authorized to operate, the key distinctions between the pit itself and an automobile. Just anecdotally, Aaron and I were working on an inspection, and a compliance officer was assessing a stand-up forklift. Not quite sure the compliance officer was understanding the difference between the stand-up forklift and the automobile, and so what the compliance officer believed to be the brake pedal was actually the dead man switch. And so just making sure that your employees really do understand that just because it's a pedal on the floor does not mean it's a gas or a brake. In that particular instance, it was a dead man switch. You want to make sure that employees understand steering and maneuvering, visibility restrictions related to loading, their overall vehicle capacity and capability, just truly understanding the ins and outs of operating whatever forklift they will be using. As it goes to workplace-related topics, it's imperative that employees understand the surface conditions where their PITs will be operating. Are the floors in one area wet and dry someplace else? Are there steep ramps or hills? Are there forklift lanes that they are expected to drive in, or pedestrian lanes that they are expected to observe and stay away from? Where are they honking their horns? Where are those blind spots within your facility? And then just other unique or potentially hazardous environmental conditions that are unique and specific to your workplace and could affect the safe operation. And then as we think about retraining, retraining under the standard is required when an operator has been observed operating their PIT in an unsafe manner. Maybe the operator is involved in an accident or near miss. That could trigger the retraining requirement. Every time an operator is assigned to a different type of truck, so maybe again it was the case that they were riding a sit down and now they're switching to a stand up, that certainly would require some additional training. And then to the extent that conditions in the workplace change and those changes could affect the safe operation of the truck, that would also trigger the retraining requirements. And then finally, with the evaluation piece, you must conduct an evaluation of each PIT operator's performance at least once every 3 years. So even if they're not required to be retrained because, you know, they're generally a safe driver, they haven't been involved in any accidents or near misses, and there aren't any changes in the workplace, the standard still does require an evaluation of their skills at least once every 3 years. Now, best practice says you should be doing this on a much more frequent basis and ensuring that it is documented, but certainly under the standard, that evaluation, even if the employee doesn't need to be retrained, is required. And just anecdotally, in OSHA's mind, if you do not document that evaluation, it did not happen. Moving next
And
to
Ashley,
the,
just add,
sorry.
I would just add that I've had multiple inspections where the compliance officer has gotten it wrong, where they tell me or my client that you need to retrain every 3 years. And I always have to go back and direct them to the standard and remind them that it's a reevaluation that's, as you just said, that's required, not retraining. Now, a lot of clients just as a means of avoiding having to go through the evaluation and just retrain anybody anyway every 3 years. So to avoid a question about whether they should have retrained based on the reevaluation, maybe it's easier to retrain than to evaluate. I don't know, you know, everyone has different reasons, but just be mindful of that if you have a compliance officer telling you, well, you need to be retraining, that's not necessarily the case. The retraining is required if the evaluation reflects an inability or misunderstanding about operations or ability to drive safely. So thanks.
Thanks, Aaron. And then the certification piece is one of the final elements of the PIT training regulations. And this one is also important because this is the documentation piece that OSHA will inevitably ask you for, and then if you are unable to produce it, cite you for, you know, just because you don't have the proper documentation verifying that an operator is certified to operate in your facility. Now, under the regulation, the certification must include the operator's name, the training date, the date the evaluation was completed, and the name of the person who is performing the evaluation. And each operator needs to have this, and so it should just be a standard part of your PIT program. This is one of those easy ones because you are required to have that written documentation. It's one of the easy ones for OSHA to cite you for, but additionally, you know, it has certainly been the case that Aaron and I have been working on inspections. The compliance officer sees the PIT, ask for the certification of the individual who is operating the PIT. And when you're able to produce that, it kind of puts their mind at ease, you know, hey, this operator, you know, they've been trained, they've been evaluated, all of their training records are up to date, their evaluation was conducted within the last 3 years. And so, you know, the compliance officer might opt to not do a deeper dive into your overall forklift program. Whereas if they ask for that certification and you're unable to produce it, I am almost certain that they're going to follow up and ask for your PIT program and take a deep dive. And so I know we've talked about training, and so here we're just going to look now at the most frequently cited training violations in fiscal year 2022. And just where those risks lie. So under subsection L1I, the general standard is to ensure that operators are competent to operate a PIT safely, as demonstrated by their successful completion of training and evaluation. And so with this violation, you know, it's possible that as OSHA is doing their deep dive into your PIT program, you could get some additional citations for perhaps failing to do an evaluation, or a paperwork citation, again, for just failing to document that certification with all of the requirements that are you need under the standard. Again, the operator's name, the training date, evaluation date, and name of the person performing the training or evaluation. Another commonly cited one is under subsection L1, Roman numeral 2, permitting employees to operate PITs without ensuring that training has been completed. And so I think we get this question a lot, you know, what if someone comes to my facility and, you know, they've been operating a PIT, the same style, the same kind for over 20 years? Do I still have to do the training? And I think best practice, you know, is to make sure that you are at the very least training on what is unique to your workplace, and then conducting that evaluation and documenting that certification. Because yes, the person might have been operating the PIT for 20 plus years, but you know, your facility might have something that's unique that they haven't encountered in those 20 plus years. And so it's going to be important that at the very least, you are going over what is unique to your facility, and then evaluating that person to make sure that they are okay operating the PITs that are present in your facility, and then making sure to document that evaluation. Some other common ones are the certification paperwork issues, the failure to conduct an evaluation of each PIT operator's performance at least every 3 years. I know Aaron mentioned this. The requirement is that you evaluate performance every 3 years, not retrain every 3 years. You know, we also see frequently cited training content violation. And so there's multiple parts to that training content. There's the classroom and the hands-on demonstration, and then the evaluation. And so if it is the case that you are, you know, doing this training, you want to make sure that you are not just doing the classroom portion, but also having them do participate in the hands-on demonstration with their trainer. And then, you know, again, you don't want to just do the hands-on training without the classroom piece. So they both work hand in hand, and you want to make sure that you are checking those boxes and keeping a record of having employees participate in the classroom, having them participate in the hands-on demonstration. And so moving from training, we will look at some repairs and defects. This again is another area that OSHA has been placing an increased focus on. Again, anecdotally, Aaron and I were working on an inspection, and the compliance officer noticed that something was leaking from underneath the forklift, and without asking kind of any additional questions to see what that was, issued a citation. And so, you know, one of the ways, and we'll get into this in greater detail, that you would defend against something like that, A, is to be in compliance with the standard. And so the key here is to remember the requirement that the forklift needs to be inspected prior to being placed into service at each shift. And so, you know, certainly it can be the case that you have every single operator going through the checklist before they get onto the forklift, but the standard requires at least once at the beginning of each shift before that forklift is placed into service. You know, and so when you do that, when you go through that inspection checklist, you are able, and it's documented, you are able to have a written document that refutes OSHA, any contention that OSHA may put forward that you haven't inspected for repair, haven't inspected for defects, and then taken the proper follow-up action for repairs. Many employers choose to document this pre-shift, pre-use inspection with an electronic checklist of some sort that works, where when an operator is checking out a PIT at the beginning of their shift, they go through that electronic checklist, and that's just one really quick and easy way to ensure that the requirement is taken care of, because before they are able to operate the forklift, they have to go through that checklist. And then, of course, you can certainly use paper records, but the key with paper records is to just make sure that they the inspections themselves are being documented prior to their use at the beginning of each shift, and then making sure that you keep up with those paper records. Maybe you scan them in, maybe you keep them in a book, but just keeping up with them so that if there is an inspection at your workplace, you are able to produce those to OSHA. Now, it is the case that some employers will come to us and say, well, you know, we do an inspection at the beginning of the day and operate that PIT across multiple shifts. That is not compliant with the standard. The standard does require an inspection of that PIT at the change of each shift. So if it's the case that a new operator is coming to relieve someone from their shift, that new operator needs to be doing their own pre-shift inspection before they begin operating the forklift. We know that this can be somewhat of an administrative burden, but this is what's required under the standard. So it's really important to make sure that operators understand you're coming in on second shift, you're coming in on third shift. Even if you saw first shift operating that forklift, there weren't any issues, that second shift employee still has to go through and do their own pre-shift inspection. And then, of course, if the inspection identifies any defects or safety issues, that PIT should be red tagged and immediately taken out of service. You know, best practice would be to keep those PITs completely separate from the ones that are in operation and ready to be used to avoid any confusion. But absolutely, you want to make sure that you're red tagging those and taking those immediately out of service. I think that I saw a question related to the fact that your facility has 3 shifts, and if you are required to do a pre-shift inspection before each shift. And to the extent that the forklifts are being used across all 3 shifts, then yes, the operator should be conducting pre-shift inspection. So the first shift comes on, they're using the forklift, they would conduct their own inspection, and then when you change out to second shift would conduct their own inspection, and then when you change out to third shift, if third shift is again going to be using that forklift, they would conduct their own inspection. And yes, you should be documenting those and then keeping up with them. Again, whether you keep them in a big binder or you have someone scan them in, you are going to want to be documenting those and keeping up with them. A few words here about attachments and additions. Attachments and additions are another major source of contention and something that OSHA gets confused about. A majority of the time, or rather almost always, if it is the case that you have a homemade attachment on a forklift and the data plate isn't updated, or that PIT and attachment haven't been examined and approved by the manufacturer or professional engineer, you are going to get a citation. So keep in mind, right, that if you are making attachments and additions to the forklift in and of itself, and you don't update that data plate, and you haven't reached out to the manufacturer or professional engineer to ensure that whatever that attachment, addition, modification is, it won't have a negative impact on the operation of the forklift, you can bet dollars to donuts that OSHA is going to issue a citation for that. Indeed, Aaron and I, again, same inspection. The forklifts that the employer had came with headlamps on them, but the facility was very well lit. There was no area in the facility that was less than 2 lumens. And so the forklifts were not required to have those headlamps. They just came as an attachment from the manufacturer. The employer opted to remove the headlamps without reaching out to the manufacturer to determine how that was going to affect the operation. And OSHA, of course, issued a citation. Now, we did argue, hey, removing headlamps has no impact whatsoever on the functionality of the forklift, on its lift and load rates, on how it handles, how it maneuvers, and indeed, it's not even required to have these headlamps under the standard. because the facility is well lit, well above that standard, well above the lumen level identified in the standard. But nevertheless, OSHA did in fact issue a citation, and that was something we had to defend against. I know I've talked about these attachments and additions, but the standard that's most often cited relates to modifications. It's under the 178 subsection A4, which states modifications and additions which affect capacity and safe operation shall not be performed by the customer or user without the manufacturer's prior written approval. Capacity, operation, and maintenance instruction plates, tags, or details shall be changed accordingly. And so the key words there are modifications and additions that have an effect on capacity and safe operation. You know, as I mentioned in that example with the headlights, OSHA is rarely analyzing whether the attachment does indeed affect the capacity and safe operation of the PIT, but you know, you can defend against that citation once OSHA says, oh, look, we got you, you made an attachment, you made a modification, you added an attachment, you didn't check with the manufacturer. But you know, that certainly can create a headache for employers more often than not. And you still will be required to get that attachment analyzed by either a manufacturer or an engineer. So best practice would be to go ahead and take the steps before you add any attachments or additions or make any modifications to go ahead and, depending on the attachment, you know, reach out to the manufacturer, reach out to the engineer, and confirm that it's not going to have any impact on the capacity and safe operation of the forklift, and then document, you know, any analysis that you've done in the event that OSHA still does issue a citation. A few words about operator violations and load stability. You know, we can see here the most commonly cited one, 30 violations in fiscal year 2022 is under subsection 01. Only stable or safely arranged load shall be handled, you know, with a special caution to be exercised when handling off-center loads which cannot be centered. And then in a close second place, subsection N6, 29 violations, requiring the driver to look in the direction of travel and keep a clear view of the path of travel. I have to tell you, this is something that I've seen on site during an inspection pretty regularly. You know, the PIT operator whizzes by and, you know, they're not looking in the direction of travel, or maybe it is that they are backing up. Oh, I'm sorry. I do see a question. Are we on the correct slide? I think we are on the next slide. Sorry about that. And so here you can see the subsection 01 with 30 violations and subsection N6 with 29 violations, where we were talking about looking in the direction of travel. Certainly something you would want to be covering in the training, and then certainly something that you would want to be observing, you know, as you're going out and about doing any sort of safety walks, watching employees in the normal operation of their job tasks, making sure that if that forklift operator is, you know, backing up, reversing, that he is looking in that direction of travel. And then certainly, of course, if he's traveling forward, that he is looking in that direction of travel. You know, these subsections that we see here account for about 12% of the PIT citations, and these are all related to operator violations. So again, you know, making sure that your training is covering these things, how to safely load, looking in the direction of travel, slowing down and using the horn when they are crossing aisles or other locations, and then the proper way to dismount. You're going to certainly want to cover those in your training, and then to the extent that you are doing safety walks, you are going to want to be checking for these things to make sure that your operators looking in the direction of travel, properly loading and unloading, using their horn, and then to the extent that you discover any violations, you are going to want to not just document them, but also make a note of any disciplinary action that you took, you know, for that operator. whether it was a verbal warning, a written warning, whether you decided, hey, not looking in the direction of travel, not properly loading and unloading, maybe that is the case that we need to do some retraining, just making a note so that to the extent that OSHA is on site, they are conducting an inspection, and the compliance officer observes someone not looking in the direction of travel, for example, you would be able to potentially assert an employee misconduct offense because you've done the training on the issue, you've walked around and observed employees in their normal course of, work, and then you have either observed that employees are doing this properly, or if you've observed that they're doing it incorrectly, you want to make sure that you've taken that appropriate corrective action and issued discipline. And then I'm going to close out my section with the best practices here. I know I've covered a lot, so these are just, the best practices in some. Certainly most important to have a written program, develop a written program that outlines, the PIT operations and the requirements for safe driving in your workplace. You're going to want to do training. You're going to want to have a robust training program that includes classroom training, the hands-on practical demonstration training, and the trainer evaluation. And you're going to want to make sure to document, that training, those training materials, and that you have that certification with all of the requirements as required under the standard, and that, employees are evaluated every 3 years. As I mentioned, you're going to want to be auditing. You're going to want to be on your safety walks, observing, your PIT operators to make sure that they are in compliance with everything that they've been trained on. They are in compliance with the standard. You're going to want to just make sure that they're doing what they are trained to do. I was once told people do what you inspect, not what you expect. And so you're going to want to go ahead and make sure that you're auditing. Are you looking in the direction of travel? Are you using your horns, when you come across cross sections? Are you aware of pedestrians and where they are in relationship to your forklift? And then to the extent that you do discover a violation, you are going to want to issue disciplinary action and make sure that you are retraining those employees whose, missteps demonstrate that they are, need retraining. And just really quickly, oh, I'm sorry, that is all that I have for you. And so with that, I will be turning it over to Aaron to talk about warehousing operations.
All right, thank you very much, Ashley. I see there have been a lot of questions coming in. I seem to be having some technical issues and unable to type responses. We will try to keep track of all the questions and get back to as many of you as possible and directly. I think some of them are pretty technical and specific, so not able to address them all now. I did want to address one that is, I think several people have asked, and that deals with the frequency of those inspections, as Ashley referenced. So what we were talking about is under 178Q7, the latter part of that section of the standard, which states that where industrial trucks are used on a round-the-clock basis, they shall be examined after each shift. So that gets to what Ashley was explaining earlier. A number of the clients that we work with to ensure compliance with that have adopted pre-use inspections. So anytime somebody a new person hops on that vehicle, they have to go through that checklist. So you avoid issues with if someone happens to pull a vehicle over and leaves it there, and then someone else just happens upon it and starts using it. There's no way to verify that person necessarily, or that vehicle has been inspected in an appropriate cadence. These systems require them to the operator who's hopping onto it to go through that inspection. The ones that do that, it is an electronic, most often, mechanism. that prevents the vehicle from being used at regular operating speeds until you go through the checklist. We've seen some pretty, what I think are some pretty neat programs that alternate the sequence of the questions. Sometimes the proper answer is yes. Sometimes it's changed to no. So that way people can't really pencil whip or just run through it by clicking yes to all the questions. So something to think about. Again, if you have any further questions about that, we're happy to talk offline, and we'll try to get through some of the other questions. Perhaps while I'm talking, Ashley, you might be able to answer some of the other ones directly through the chat. I think we may have fixed the issue. Otherwise, again, we'll try to get back to you all with answers to some of your questions. So with that, switching gears a little bit, still some obviously forklifts are central and integral to warehouse operations. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about this national emphasis program. As I said at the start of the program, so this was announced a couple months ago, just about 2 months ago in mid-July. Did not come as a surprise to us. There were a handful of regional emphasis programs, including in Region 3. And when you look at the growth of the warehousing and distribution business, as I was saying, I think in a recent program, you drive by, it seems lots of times in these industrial parks are springing up, especially, in near areas near airports and other transportation hubs. And there's one warehouse after another. The third-party logistics businesses, obviously the explosive growth of Amazon, that OSHA has taken notice. And there are particular hazards that the agency has identified, which prompted the issuance of the regional emphasis programs. And I think based on what they found in those regional emphasis programs, the decision was made to expand into a national emphasis program. If you've heard me talk about emphasis programs, you've read any of the blog articles that we've written about emphasis programs, they're important for a number of reasons, and it's important to take note of them. Obviously, I think as everyone most likely understands, right, that an emphasis program means that you may be selected specifically and exclusively because of your membership or your industrial classification, your NAICS code. So you can have a spotless safety record. Maybe you don't even have a single recordable in the prior year. Nobody's complained. There haven't been any accidents or any near misses, but your number comes up on the randomly generated list maintained by the area office, and you're going to be inspected. And given the fact, as we know, and I'm sure if you've joined prior webinars that we've done, when we go through some of our statistics slides, that OSHA finds a violation in more than 70% of the time when they're coming out into facilities. It also, I think, as Ashley referenced with respect to the local emphasis programs dealing with power industrial trucks here in Illinois, for example, they may come out with respect to a complaint, with respect to an injury, and instead of limiting the scope of that inspection to the complaint or to the area of the accident or injury, they may then use the NEP to expand into a much larger, broader inspection that covers all the areas of focus of that NEP. And then there may be additional emphasis programs that come into play as well. So why else? Again, many of these, or a couple of these slides you've seen before, most likely. If this is your first CMC webinar, take note. If not, don't worry. I'm not gonna linger on the next couple slides, but just know that the penalty has been rising every year since 2016. It's going to go up again in 2024. Presumably, willful repeats are going to go close, I would imagine, close to 170,000, and serious and citations and potentially other than serious as high, close to 17,000. And so when OSHA comes out for an emphasis program, if you get a compliance officer who is thorough and knowledgeable and really is taking their time, and they find multiple citations, right, that just means that the cost is going to go up. And if you've got prior citations on any of the areas that I'm going to talk about in a minute, the citations that are typically issued to warehousing and distribution employers, and many of these, and just I want to be clear, When I go through some of those items, they're going to apply, even if you're not covered by this emphasis program. There are going to be some, I think, suggestions and areas for you all to think about. So if you're a manufacturing company, you have a warehouse, or you've got you're a food service company that isn't covered by the NEP, you're still going to want to take notes of these issues. So as the penalties rise, again, you know that we beat the drum here at CMC about repeat citations. Almost every year, the percentage of citations issued as a repeat goes up. We're good bet that next year, or when the statistics next year come out for this year, that it'll be over 6%, and that matters again because repeats used to be capped at 70, and now we're going to be closer to 170,000. If you have multiple operations in multiple OSHA states, and you've gotten any of the citations that you typically see in a warehousing or distribution type center, you're at risk for repeats. I won't get into the historical differences and how OSHA conducts inspections and manages enforcement now. Suffice to say, that they're going to be looking at your entire corporation across the country in all OSHA states. They're going to look back 5 years instead of what used to be 3 years. And as evidenced by this national emphasis program, they're going to do so proactively, meaning they now look for reasons to come back. I've also been making it a point to let employers know that OSHA is also conducting a significant number of follow-up inspections, more than I can recall. So if you've been inspected in the past, if you've been cited in the last couple of years, there is a good chance that they will come back to check in, to see how you're doing with respect to abatement, to make sure that the measures that you told them you put in place when you submitted that certification worksheet are indeed still in place. If you got cited for lack of training, they may come back and look at your training records. If you got cited for not doing pre-use and pre-shift inspections, they may come back and ask your employees if they're doing pre-shift inspections. So, really pay attention to those issues in those areas. So this slide just quickly covers the NAICS codes that are governed by the national emphasis program. You can see there are a host of them, and there are two different sectors, if you will. There's the warehousing and distribution centers, delivery services. So NAICS codes in the 491, 492, 493, but then also certain retailers that have high injury rates, and you can see those in the right-hand column. So one thing that's important, we were recently going through this with a client that assumed, and I think both we and the client assumed, that they were going to be covered by the emphasis program, but as we dug deeper, found that, lo and behold, their NAICS codes are not included in this emphasis program, even though they operate distribution centers. And so be prepared and understand that OSHA may show up believing that you're covered by the emphasis program. It's happened more than you might imagine. And where in that opening conference, if they're telling you that we're here under this emphasis program to have a discussion, like, we understand, we report our injuries, upload them into the electronic record keeping database or what have you under this NAICS code, this is not covered under your emphasis program. And I would certainly recommend in those situations that you basically hit the pause button and tell OSHA that we are, we don't believe that we're covered, so there is no basis to proceed with an inspection. We're open to discussing that with the area office further, but we'd like to put a pin in it, in essence, because once you let them in, and if they see things, they find things, right, and you can't unring that bell. So that is the time to question whether indeed you are covered by the emphasis program. If you are in one of the blue shaded, and that is the medium blue in this slide. So here in Illinois, we are a OSHA state, as is New York, New Jersey, but a number of states, those darker blue shaded ones, or the darkest on this slide, are ones typically where the state handles state employees, and then OSHA handles private industry. The lightest blue are the Fed OSHA states, and the medium blue are the state plans. So if you are in a state plan, just know that OSHA expects that the state plans to adopt an emphasis program that is at least as effective as the Fed plan. They can certainly, as those of you particularly out west, California, Oregon, Washington, likely know that your state plans can make the programs more strict, more effective, so to speak. So keep an eye out if and when your state adopts that emphasis program. If it is different, you're going to want to know how it's different, and we're certainly going to be tracking that as well. So when will the inspections start? So soon. Typically, there is a 3-month outreach period. It's possible and likely that where you're based, the local area office may have had webinars or been doing other forms of outreach, speaking, presenting on this emphasis program, publicizing it to the regulated community. So with that 3 months, I would expect that these inspections will begin in or around mid-October or early November. So still time to get ready, and we're going to talk about some of the things that you can think about doing as you begin to do that. What will the inspections look like? As I said, one of the first things that should happen during the opening conference, so OSHA shows up and you escort the compliance officer or compliance officers, plural. We're seeing lots of paired inspections with OSHA hiring a significant number of new compliance officers. So there may be a trainee or observer accompanying the lead COSHO in these inspections. Park them in the conference room, gather the necessary people. I like to keep my opening conferences lean. And once you get started, that should be one of the first things. And as I just said, that's your opportunity to confirm that you indeed are covered by the emphasis program. And so with respect to once that is confirmed, remember, these are going to be broad inspections. It's essentially a wall-to-wall inspection focused on the areas that are called out in the document issued when OSHA launched the emphasis program. Like any inspection, the compliance officer is going to request your 300 logs most likely for the current year and the 3 years prior, your 300A summaries. Obviously, if they come within that time of year where they're supposed to be posted, they may go ask to look to see if they have been posted. They are also instructed and expected to review potential heat exposure and ergonomic issues. We are in the middle of an incredibly detailed ergonomic inspection, and with that lasted multiple days with multiple compliance officers. So just know, in that case, we were able to kind of delay things a little bit and bring in our own ergonomics expert to observe what OSHA was doing, to confirm that that their expert or their ergonomics person was evaluating things the correct way, but also for our expert to do their own assessment. So we're in a better position should OSHA attempt to issue a general duty clause citation to better defend against it. If during the course of this assessment, the compliance officer determines that there may be heat-related hazards, then an additional inspection may be opened, and then they will be digging into potential heat hazards in your workplace as well. So as I just said on the last slide, the warehouse side of the house here, so not the high injury rate retail side, but on the warehouses and distribution centers, these will be comprehensive safety and health inspections. Those on the high injury rate retail side will be partial scope, meaning that they will be limited to the storage and loading areas. Of course, like anything, depending on where they go and what they see and what they're told, that they may attempt to expand it. That's always a good time to ask questions, and before you agree to expand it, see if there is a legitimate basis to do that. If you're concerned or questioning whether there is, it's a good time to get us involved if we're not already involved. The inspections are going to focus on power industrial trucks, so everything that Ashley talked about, as well as material handling standard, walking working surfaces, the potential for slip, trips, and falls, fire protection, locked aisles, egress, and then, as I said, heat, illness, and ergonomics. Those are the issues that OSHA will be focused on in these inspections. So, as I said before, even if you are not covered specifically by this national emphasis program, we're going to just run through some of the issues, the most frequently cited citation sections of the standards that are applicable, whether you're covered by the standard or not. If you have a warehouse, if you have storage racks, these are the things that we see time and time again. So under the material storage or material handling standard, most commonly cited section is 176B, which deals with ensuring that material is stored in such a way that it does not create a hazard. Also frequently cite kind of, this is where there's that intersection with the forklift standard in terms of that your aisles are designed and built in such a way that the power industrial trucks can be safely used, that the aisles and passageways are kept in safe repair, and also that you have good housekeeping practices that do not create hazards as well in storage areas. These are all things, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but one of the things that we highly recommend is doing regular audits, safety walks, with a regular cadence, ideally having multiple managers and supervisors, even if possible, every manager on some cadence, whether it's daily, weekly, and having a checklist where they are documenting, not that they found things, but they've done the observations. So somewhat similar to when you go to a restroom and you see that it's been cleaned. If I get records from a client that can show that, on a regular basis, again, daily or every couple of days, or even more frequently, that they are checking to confirm that the material is stored properly, that there's nothing loose up in the storage racks, that there's nothing left on the floor, that things are picked up. That's going to go a long way to A, avoiding a citation, and B, giving us some really good evidence to use to argue to get that citation vacated or deleted without having to contest it. I've done a lot of work with racking related citations that are issued under the general duty clause. Sadly, I've worked on a number of fatalities involving racking collapses. The questions that I always asked, probably first and foremost, and I find that inspections go much better, like many things in the safety and health world, right? Do you have a program? And so I highly recommend that employers, whether you're in the warehousing business, logistics, or you manufacturing facility with a warehouse, you should be inspecting your racks, your storage rack systems on a regular basis. They should be documented. The people, you should have an inspection team that is trained, that they know what to look for, what sort of damage requires immediate action, to being able to prioritize and say this may compromise the structural integrity of this racking system. We need to offload it and tape it off. Or we can continue to use it and monitor, or we just put in a work order and we fix it whenever we can. But knowing that those things, knowing what to do when damage is observed, that is I think vitally important. We recently had an inspection where OSHA came out based on a complaint, and we went out onto the floor with the compliance officer, and the maintenance team was in the middle of repairing damaged racks, and it was so perfect that the compliance officer, I think, initially suspected that we might have done this for their benefit, when we were able to quickly show that no, we do daily rack inspections, we document everything. This was an issue that was identified the day before the work order was put in, and the team was already out fixing it. That was an inspection that was closed within the same day. Because warehouses are often kind of sparsely populated, if you will, and there's not always somebody in a certain area. There might not be managers right there that people can raise concerns to. Make sure your employees have various avenues to report concerns or questions about damage. Ideally, there might be, there's a hotline, there's a suggestion box, there are supervisors with an open door policy. So you can go, if OSHA ever does have concerns about damage that has not been addressed, you can say, we train our employees on what to look for and if they see it to let us know. These are all the ways that they can raise these concerns. If you identify issues and you're outsourcing the repairs, make sure that the person who you hire, I know this sounds common sense, is clearly common sense, but I have seen plenty of employers that use their cleaning contractor or use some general person who really doesn't have the skill level necessarily to identify whether racks have been compromised. How many times can you re-drill the holes in the floor for the anchor bolts? Do they know properly how to do welding? That's something that you need to think about. The question, do you have Franken racks? That just means particularly if you bought a facility that was operated by another entity, do you have records regarding their maintenance? Do you know whether they used appropriately credentialed contractors to do the repairs? Or do you have a racking system that's been cobbled together over the years such that one more bump from a forklift is going to cause the whole thing to collapse? If you have concerns in that regard, then my clear recommendation is to retain a structural engineer who can test and assess your racking and make recommendations. And then last but not least, do you have load rating placards in place, and are they visible? They haven't worn out. There are other ways to, if you have a computerized fulfillment program that directs the forklifts and where items can be placed, that automatically ensures that a pallet of a certain weight will not be placed in a certain location. That's one thing, but generally, OSHA is going to be looking for load rating placards, typically at the end of each row. All right, switching gears to exit doors and routes. I'm sure many of you all are familiar with these requirements. This is one of those easy to cite and difficult to defend types of citations, right? If your exit door doesn't have a sign, if the light bulbs are burnt out, if you've got doors that do not lead to an exit and don't have a sign, obviously if they're blocked, if they're not wide enough, all these types of violations. Again, these are the most frequently cited ones, and consistent with what I was saying before, our recommendation is, this is a great thing to have a daily checklist. In the retail setting, I've seen, OSHA still issues citations, even if you say at the beginning of the shift and the end of the shift, we're assessing and auditing for compliance with these requirements. They may still issue a citation, but if I can go into that informal conference or after contest, talk to the solicitor, and I'm armed with pages and pages of daily assessments, I've got a much better chance of getting these types of citations deleted. But these can be very transitory, temporary obstructions or issues. Obviously, maybe not a burnt out sign or an access point that's not structurally the right size. But these sorts of things, again, you're training the employees what they don't put things here. And as Ashley said, if you're inspecting for these things, the employees they're generally going to pick it up, and they're hopefully more likely to not leave things in the wrong place, not block panels, not block exits. Fire safety is another one that can be challenging with respect to, are you doing the inspections? Are you doing the monthly visual inspections? Are you doing the annual maintenance checks? Quite often folks are, but are they documenting them? And again, I always hate it when OSHA tells me, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. I don't agree with that. I can always offer evidence through testimony, but obviously that's a lot more difficult and more might mean you have to go to a hearing instead of just being able to provide documentation to confirm that the appropriate inspections are being done. So again, just consistent with the exit routes and signage, this is another great thing to make sure that you include in your regular internal safety walks or safety audits. You may have joined us in the past for a heat illness webinar, so I'll move quickly through the next, I think, these two slides. But because weather and climate continues to be a particular focus for OSHA, as we continue to march closer and closer to the publication of a heat illness rule, and little plug for our coalition. Many of you may know that we've formed a number of employer coalitions to comment on rulemaking, particularly during COVID. We're doing that also with the heat illness rulemaking process. So if you'd like your voice heard and you want to, have some input on regarding the potential terms and conditions in the standard, let us know. It's not too late to join that coalition. But if you're looking for the things, right, until there is a standard, once there is a standard, if it's as prescriptive as I think it might be, and you think about like the lockout tag out standard, you have to have a program, you have to have training, you have to have procedures. If we get to that level of specificity, it's going to be very clear what you're going to need to do, and it'll be very easy to issue citations for OSHA if you are not doing those things. Right now, until we see a standard, if you want to put yourself in a good position that OSHA would not issue a citation to you under the general duty clause related to heat hazards, then our recommendation is or number one, have a written program. That's always a very important fundamental aspect of many safety and health issues. Right off the bat, if OSHA comes out on an inspection and you can hand them a well-written, thought-out program, that nine times out of 10 your inspection is going to just go better. Just with that, are you monitoring temperature in the workplace? Do you have certain areas that get hotter, certain processes, certain rooms, departments? Are you tracking those things? Are you tracking the outdoor temperature so you know it's going to be hotter indoors? The number of clients that do that, they have thresholds when the weather forecast says it's going to be a certain point, they just automatically then go adopt or implement the measures in their program that are triggered by those temperatures. Some of the much more straightforward aspects, making sure that you have an unlimited amount of cool water that is easily accessible to employees. What does that mean? Right, it shouldn't have to go too far to get that cool water, and there should be enough that you're not running out. Obviously, I've participated in meetings with OSHA officials who have made some. I won't identify the area of the country, made some comments that I think don't represent the general view within the agency. This one official made a comment about, well, as long as there's water, in the main part of the plant, that's fine. My experience in talking to compliance officers during inspections is that they expect more than just one or two locations of water. So just keep that in mind. Consider additional breaks for hydration or for cooling off, particularly if you have heat in your processes and it gets even hotter than the outdoor temperature. I think that is an excellent idea. Include scheduled number of clients that I think have good programs that are working well and well received by OSHA will add an additional break during the hottest days when certain temperature thresholds are exceeded. If folks are working outdoors, there should be access to a shaded area. Obviously, we know like OSHA's focus in the agricultural world is in construction and other regular outdoor jobs or water, rest, and shade. But keep in mind, if you are operating a warehouse or a manufacturing facility, there may be employees who are working outdoors, and just make sure those folks have access to shade. I think acclimatization is a little bit more complicated, but also I think particularly it's a particular focus with OSHA. They have pretty specific, there are guidelines that have been published with recommendations as far as the amount of time that someone should be acclimatized, the period over which this is being done, with their load gradually being increased. Do you have a buddy system, meaning that each worker is assigned to somebody else, so that way if one person is exhibiting signs or symptoms of heat illness, the other person might be more would be expected or encouraged to report that or bring that to the attention of the appropriate person. There are administrative controls that you can consider. Obviously, some of these are not always feasible. OSHA talks about changing the start times. That might work for construction or landscaping, but I think typically I don't know too many manufacturing companies or warehouses that are going to shut down in the middle of the day, or that people can just start working earlier because it's hot. Job rotation, on the other hand, if there are areas within your facility that are hotter than others, one option is to consider rotating the people through there. Obviously, that could then raise issues with respect to making sure everybody who works in that area is appropriately trained. But again, it's better to have considered something and have an explanation for why you're not doing it than not to have considered it at all. And then last but not least, training. I think really that if you take away kind of three key elements, really it's or three or four key elements. It's having a written program, making sure that there's access to fluids, making sure that there is an acclimatization element to your program, and then training people, training your employees to recognize the signs and symptoms of heat illness, the things that might make them more susceptible to it. Not everybody understands that if they have a big party on Sunday, a barbecue, or they're watching the game, their team's on Sunday night football, and they drink a lot that night, that can set them up for greater risk of being dehydrated the next day. Maybe the fact that they're taking certain prescription medications, et cetera. And then training your managers and supervisors as to what to do, make sure that they understand that people can take breaks, that they can go get water, and that they know what to do if somebody has a medical emergency. All right, so just to wrap up, just as Ashley did at the end of her section, my recommendations, if you're looking to prepare for a possible emphasis program inspection, or just generally want to assess your operations in your warehouses or distribution centers, make sure you've got a rack inspection program. Make sure you've got a written forklift or PIT program, and you're addressing all the issues that Ashley so effectively discussed. Again, the training, the reevaluations, the pre-use or pre-shift inspections, et cetera. Make sure you're doing your fire extinguisher inspections. I'm a big fan of safety stand downs or toolbox talks. If PITs are essential, an integral part of your operations, the clients that a lot of the clients I work with in this field will do 2 to 3 stand downs a year, or just toolbox talks focused on pit safety, just to keep these issues or concerns top of mind. A couple of them do pick one month, which is pit safety month. So each week there's a focus on pit safety. Make sure again, if you think that if your NAICS codes are covered, and there's a good chance that you think you might be selected for a NEP inspection, it's a good time to check your 300 logs. Make sure you're getting record keeping right. I'll make a plug for our record keeping masterclass. If you haven't heard about that, give me or Ashley a call and we can tell you more about it. And if you are already doing it, or you like our recommendation, and you think it would make sense to be doing those safety walks, make sure that they're being done and documented. You do those things and you cover all the issues in the safety walks that we've gone through, you'll put your organization in a much better position should you be inspected. So all things considered, I think a CMC webinar that is done in 70 minutes is a success. As you all, I'm sure many of you know, we love to nerd out and talk about safety. We could go on and on and on about many of these issues. So, but want to be respectful of your time. We will let you know that obviously we still have, I think, 3 webinars left coming up this year. We'll provide, we'll be sending out email announcements regarding them. There might be a few changes, I think, to the schedule. Keep an eye out for our blog articles. They're published pretty regularly. I think we've tried to answer a number of the questions. Again, I apologize if we couldn't get to them all live today. We will keep track of them as best we can and try to reach out to those of you individually who we did not get answers to. If for some reason we don't get back to you and you really want to really want to talk through one or more of the questions that you've got, let us know. I will try to, just as I wrap up, just see a couple questions. One person asked if rack inspections need to be done on a daily basis. No, it's not. There is no requirement to do rack inspections. That there isn't a standard that requires that. So OSHA can't cite you for not doing them on a daily basis. My approach to this is really depends on how you use storage racks, right? If you're a distribution center where very heavy things are stored and your operators are interacting with those racks frequently throughout the day, you're using high reaches, which have a tendency to counterbalance that might be shearing off anchor bolts, and people are maybe evaluated and compensated on the number of orders that they pick. That typically means that there's going to be more rack damage. And so you should inspect more regularly. If it's a pretty quiet warehouse and things don't move all that quickly, you can inspect less frequently. I would think that certainly on a weekly basis would be recommended there. But again, a lot of that, and you can talk to the manufacturer or installer of your racks, see if they have a recommended cadence. Your safety consultant, et cetera. So every workplace is going to be different. As far as same thing, a question about how do you train the inspection team? Again, I'd probably look to the company that has installed or maintains your racks. That there's typically going to be guidance that they can provide as far as, a bend of this angle or damage to a cross beam versus a secondary support or what have you. Give you some guidelines as far as, so what you're looking for and what you need to do. So another question, I think I'll probably the last question, just as I want to try to wrap up by a quarter after. Someone asked, kind of following up on what I was talking about with respect to what if you're not under one of the NAICS codes, but OSHA says that they've got you categorized under one that is under the program. Great question, and that's where my approach would be. Look, we seem to be kind of at loggerheads here. We have been reporting under this NAICS code, and this is the NAICS code that our insurance company, whatever it is, and we understand that you think we're a different one. So we're not saying we refuse to consent to the inspection, but we think that it makes sense to again hit the pause button. You can go back to your area office and let's schedule a call in the next day or so to have this discussion. Right? They should understand that you're not refusing to consent, and I would emphasize that. We just want to make sure that if we are going to proceed with this inspection, that your office didn't make a mistake. You might get one of those compliance officers that gets angry, gets frustrated, and threatens to get a warrant. I think it's unlikely because they're going to go back and talk to the solicitor's office, and if a solicitor gets a call, we want a warrant to inspect this company, they're refusing to let me in because they say that they've got a different NAICS code than what we have for them. And provided your NAICS code is actually appears appropriate to your industry, right? So it's not something completely doesn't apply. I would imagine that some digging needs to take place on OSHA side to justify that, and they should. understand that and agree to hold off. So that is my recommended approach. So I hope that answers a number of the questions. Again, we'll try to get back to oh, I see one more, sorry. Is there a definitive place to verify your NAICS code? You can, I think it's through this, interestingly enough, the census website. But if you Google NAICS codes, eventually you'll get to the right place where you can kind of type in some keywords about your operations, and it will take you to what appears to be the correct NAICS code. But just know that there are NAICS codes, or there are enough NAICS codes that I think there's in a number of places and industries, there are arguments that more than one NAICS code applies. We've seen situations where grocery stores that operate warehouses have their warehouses categorized as grocery stores. I think that would be inaccurate. But we have clients, and you can search OSHA's database, inspection database by NAICS code or industrial classification SIC codes, and I've noticed that there are employers in the same general space with different NAICS codes. So it's not an exact science, and I think as long as it appears to be appropriately selected and not selected with the purpose of avoiding coverage under a NAICS code or avoiding the electronic record keeping requirements, I think it's likely going to be defensible. If anyone has any questions about, do we have the right NAICS code? We do look at that from time to time for employers, and we can assist with that as well. So I hope that's been helpful. We will again try to get back to those of you whose questions we did not answer. And again, please feel free to give me or Ashley or any of the CMC attorneys with whom you've worked a call if you have further questions. So with that, thank you for joining us for the September 2023 webinar. Stay safe, be well, and we hope to see you at a future program. Thank you.